Hello and welcome back to Pennies and Plans. For this episode we're going to talk about a retiree's mortgage horror story. I will say up front this is quite a sad and sobering story, but it does have some really important lessons, so bear with me. Hello and welcome to our channel. We are Lizzie and Bob. We're in our 50s, we live in Glasgow, Scotland, and we're heading towards our goal of early retirement by making plans and being careful with our money. Retirement really does throw up so many questions, but hopefully we can break these areas down into manageable and sensible sections that will help us with our plans, choices and decisions. We hope you enjoy and come along with us on this journey. So, the story begins in 1991 when Mr. X and Mrs. X, who were both 50 and 49 respectively at that time, took out a mortgage to buy their ex-council house under the scheme that was available at the time. Now, the house cost $8,850 back in 1991 and it was taken over a 20-year period. That would, in 20 years' time, take Mr. X to 70 years old and Mrs. X to 69 years old. Fast forward to 2004, when the council were carrying out various repairs in all of the houses in the local area. As the owners of the property, Mr. and Mrs. X required to take out a loan to carry out these additional repairs. They took out an extra £3,000, which then brought their total outstanding amount of a mortgage up to £11,850. At this point in time, Mr. X was 63 and Mrs. X was 62, and neither one of them were working any longer. Then we fast forward to 2013, where Mr. X sadly passed away. He was 72 years old and he left Mrs. X 71, still with a remaining mortgage. Now in 2015, Mrs. X, who was now 73 years old, realised she still had quite a bit of a mortgage and she didn't understand this. So she went to her bank and discovered that she had been on an interest-only mortgage since the loan had been taken out. So Mrs. X was 73 at this age. She went to her bank and that's when she discovered she was on an interest-only mortgage and none of the actual capital had ever been paid off. And Mrs. X had no mechanism or vehicle in place to pay that capital off. So in 2015, she then started a repayment mortgage to try and pay off the mortgage amount. Sadly, in 2021, Mrs. X, now 70 years of age, passed away. When she passed away, she left a debt of £5,107.63 and a remaining 3 years in terms outstanding on the loan. Had she survived those 3 years, she would have been 81 years old by the time her mortgage was paid off. In 2023, the house was sold to repay the mortgage and a number of other debts. So if we look at this individually, Mr. and Mrs. X took out a 20-year mortgage which turned into a 30-year one. They took out the home loan later in life, at age 50 and 49. They were only paying interest on the loan. They weren't paying any of the capital. They were also paying the standard variable rate on the mortgage, which was a lot higher than if they had had it fixed at a fixed rate. They had never missed a mortgage payment in all of the time, but it was quite clear from their bank statements that they did struggle. There wasn't much spare cash. In total, they paid £48,200 on an original £11,850 mortgage, and they still had £5,107 outstanding at the time of Mrs. X's death. Subsequently, the house had to be sold to repay the outstanding amount and various other debts. When you look at the retirement living standards charts, you can see that from 2019 to 2022 there has been quite a steep increase in what is required for whether it's a single, moderate or a comfortable lifestyle. It was quite clear that Mrs. X was in this banding. In addition, the sharp increase in the cost of living over the last few years has increased the most, that is 17.8%, for those already living on the minimum amount. So there will be some retirees really struggling right now. And again, Mrs. X was in this category. Had she survived into 2022, would be really struggling. The retirement living standards also throws up quite a few interesting facts. So, and of these, the main things I would point out are that with the state pension of £10,600 per year, which is what it is at the moment, is only for folk who have got their full contributions within that. Some retirees would not be entitled to the full state pension. Mrs. X wasn't entitled to the full state pension. She did have a small pension from Mr. X, but it was nowhere near what she really needed to survive. The other really, really interesting thing is the fact that the standards do not include rent or mortgage costs, because generally speaking, most retirees, by the time they retire, no longer have a mortgage, or they have sufficient funds, or they've sold their home and they have a nice big pot of money that will see them into retirement, that can see them downsize and perhaps rent, etc. In this case, Mrs. X did have a mortgage, and she would have had a mortgage to the age of 81. That's quite a sobering and horrific thought. Now, I also will say at this stage, Mrs. X's family had no idea that she even had a mortgage or any of this. So when Mrs. X's executor wrote to Mrs. X's bank, which was the Halifax Bank, she complained because it was quite clear that this elderly couple had had a mortgage for a long, long time, paying a standard rate and only paying the interest. She never got a response back from the Halifax Bank because they wrote direct to the property, which the executor was not there and was not able to access that information. So that wasn't ideal. So what are the lessons from this? The lessons are: not all retirees will have a paid off mortgage or be rent free. Mrs. X is an example in case of this. She had a mortgage that none of her family knew about. They suspected it had been paid off years ago and were really shocked to discover that this was an outstanding debt. Talk to your family members about their finances. Don't assume people know what they're doing. Don't assume your elderly parents have it all figured out. Check in with them, and if you have to, encourage them to seek professional help and advice around their finances. It's one of those topics a lot of people don't like to talk about, but it's better to do it. Mrs. X was possibly embarrassed or ashamed and didn't open up about the state of her finances to her family, who could probably have done something to help if only she had done that earlier. Lenders really should be more responsible, especially where it's clear that people may not fully understand their mortgage terms and conditions, and when it is clear they are struggling. There are definitely the retirees out there right now that will be struggling, especially with the cost of living crisis that we've got going on in the UK. So on a final note, please, if this can help one person, then that would be great. Mr. and Mrs. X were my parents. Please, don't be like my parents. And if you've got elderly parents, talk to them, especially if they're not well off elderly parents. Talk to them and try and make sure that they're doing okay. It's never been more important than it is today, with everything that's going on and the cost of living and crisis. It's just quite horrific, and there will be people really, really struggling. So that's my sad and sobering story for today. Thanks for watching and listening. We hope you found this information valuable, and if you are on a similar journey to us, then please consider liking, subscribing and dinging that bell for future updates. In the meantime, it's onwards and upwards towards retirement for us.